Good evening. Welcome to Crowd Church. My name is Matt. Beside me is the beautiful Will Sotwith.
Good evening, all. Lovely to see you. It's nice to have a little bit of slightly cooler weather today, I have to say. Been sweltering this week. If you've been sweltering too in the UK, I hope you've enjoyed it. My colleague actually from works in Barcelona. She came over to the UK for a course, and she was like, "Oh, finally some like normal summer weather." And she got off the plane in London, going, "It's hotter than at home. What am I doing here?"
Yeah, we've had an amber warning. That's how serious it's been. Ironically, since they gave us the amber warning, it's been cooler. I don't know if you noticed that. It was really hot, and we got the amber warning. They said, "Yeah." So it's just a thing we do in England, by the way. If you're outside of the UK, when the weather, we just always talk about the weather. It's like weather and football, the two things we talk about. And beer, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, we're actually a church, believe it or not. So a very warm welcome to you. It's great that you're here with us all the way from the amber warning capital of Liverpool, broadcasting live around the world. Yeah, which is just, it's quite staggering when you think about it. But today we are talking about Sabbath and rest specifically. And to do that, we have the very lovely Anna Kell, who's going to be speaking. Is that right?
I am, yeah. I'm starting now, am I?
No, because I need to do the whole limbo warm-up intro.
I was just checking. I was like, you want me to go now? We're so slick, aren't we, as ever?
Did we exactly say slack?
Slack, yeah, more like it.
Slack and slick, all at the same time. So yeah. Sorry, that was my bad. That was really poorly done. Anna's going to be talking to us about Sabbath, which is going to be great. So grab your notebooks, grab your pens, and of course you can write any questions, any thoughts, all that sort of stuff in the comments as we go along. And do that, because after the talk we have Conversation Straight, Conversation Street even.
We're struggling with our words tonight, hey?
We should let's just stop the live stream and start
Must be the heat.
It's the amber warning. So yes, we are going to have Conversation Street. So do write your questions in the comments, and we will hopefully be able to answer them for you as we go through. Will and I and Anna are going to be back after Anna's finished doing a talk. We're going to do Conversation Street. So yeah, if it's your first time with us, by the way, a very warm welcome to you. This is just kind of how we do it. We just ramble on a little bit at the start. Anna's going to do the talk. Then after, we have something called Conversation Street, which is where we go through your questions, your comments, all the stuff you put in the comments. And so yeah, I always look forward to Conversation Street. I actually prefer doing Conversation Street than to doing the talks, but it takes a lot less prep because you can't really prep for the questions. But yeah, it's good. So anyway, without further ado, let's bring on the very lovely, very beautiful Anna Kettle.
Thank you. So I wonder, have you noticed how being too busy has kind of become like a badge of honour in our culture today? Why is it that how packed our schedules are and how little time we have has kind of become something to brag about? I think if we're honest deep down, we all know that this kind of bit over busyness isn't too good for us. We live with such high levels of stress, burnout, anxiety, overwhelm. And mental health challenges are just skyrocketing. That's why I'm so passionate about this subject of Sabbath rest. You know, it's an ancient practice that's rooted deeply in Scripture, and it offers us a really radical, countercultural antidote to the pressures of modern living. I wonder what the first thing that comes to mind is when you hear the word Sabbath, though. I think for many people, it's probably just become shorthand for having a day off. And usually, in our Western context, it's a Sunday. But over the next 15 minutes or so in this talk, I want to unwrap it a bit more and show you that Sabbath is so much more than this. Choosing to practice Sabbath, that is taking one day off in 7 to stop and rest, it's a profound statement of our trust in God and his provision. And it's a declaration that we believe our worth is not found in productivity alone. Practicing Sabbath reminds us that our identity and value is not just tied to our productivity or achievement and our success alone, but it's grounded in who we are as God's beloved creation. Sabbath reminds us that we matter simply because we are his. So what does the Bible actually have to tell us about this idea of Sabbath? Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we? Literally. Let's start in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. In Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3, the Bible tells us that God rested on the seventh day after 6 days of creating the world. It says, God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. He rested from all the work he'd done in creation. Now, do you ever wonder why this is? I mean, it was obvious that God wasn't tired and he didn't need a break. You know, the Bible makes it very clear that God doesn't need to rest the way that we do as humans. Isaiah 40:28, for example, says that the Lord is everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. So why did God take a Sabbath then? Well, personally, I think that he was modeling Sabbath as a rhythm of rest, an example of how we could live. Right at the start of creation's story, he was giving us an example of how to live well, setting aside 1 day in 7 that wasn't just about work, but was about being holy to God. The Creator God obviously didn't need to Sabbath, but maybe he knew that we needed to. Maybe he knew that as created beings, we're prone to striving, to overworking, to losing sight of what's really important in our busy lives. The idea of Sabbath is something that appears again in the following book of the Bible, in Exodus, when God introduces the 10 Commandments to the Israelites. In Exodus 20, the commandments are kind of introduced as a set of rules and principles to live by, sort of principles for living well, really. And Sabbath is right there at the heart of it. It says in Exodus 20, 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but on the 7th day is to be a Sabbath unto the Lord. So Sabbath is connected again to this idea of pausing from work, refocusing, taking time for worship and having time that's set apart in our lives for God. And then throughout the Old Testament, Sabbath just recurs as this theme. It's a tool to help the Israelites remember who they are as a people. So even when they're enslaved in a foreign land, Sabbath is a time for them to recall their identity, to remember that they're God's people first. And then when we move forward into the New Testament, in the more recent part of the Bible, we learn that Jesus practices Sabbath too. But not just as a Jewish law that he followed, not just as a cultural kind of tradition. For Jesus, the whole purpose of Sabbath is linked to this idea of human healing and flourishing and wholeness. So when some religious leaders come, for example, and question him about why he's healed a man on a Sabbath day, shouldn't he be resting? In Mark 2:27, he replies this: the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So here, Jesus is challenging the idea that practicing Sabbath is just about keeping a rule. He's showing that it's so much more than just Sabbath for Sabbath's own sake, and actually it's about spiritually serving us and others around us. So I want to quickly look at a few of the misconceptions that exist around Sabbath that have grown up in contemporary Christianity, and just consider for a moment what Sabbath isn't. Firstly, Sabbath is not about legalism. You know, some Christians might say, I don't practice Sabbath anymore because it's old-fashioned or it's a bit legalistic. But actually, as we've just seen in this scripture just now, it's not God's heart for us at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. Sabbath is meant to be a gift which supports our human flourishing and our healing and our wholeness. We don't have to Sabbath as a rule, but we get Sabbath. It's a privilege, a blessing, and a gift. Sabbath is also not just about Sundays. Now, although many Christians do gather together and worship in churches, particularly on a Sunday, it doesn't have to be a Sunday. It can be applied on any day. And actually, for Jewish people and in the culture that Jesus lived in, it was actually practiced from a Friday evening to a Saturday evening. Thirdly, Sabbath is not passive. You know, it's not just a day off. It's not a day of checking out of life, zoning out in front of Netflix or just chilling on the couch all day. It's much more proactive. The biblical idea of Sabbath is about actively engaging with God, with other people around us, and with God's creation too. So really, I'd also say Sabbath is not actually just optional for Christians. You know, it's something that God's given us and designed to be more than just an occasional thing, something to squeeze in life when we can manage it. It's meant to be a regular practice, a discipline, a regular rhythm of life, which is necessary to help our spiritual, mental, and physical health and thriving. We're better when we Sabbath. And as we alluded to before, we live in this kind of mental health epidemic right now. But the good news is that Sabbath is actually a gift that can help us offset some of the worst impacts of our always-on digital culture. In reclaiming biblical Sabbath, we can actually begin to learn a more truthful, more honest way of being human in a world that's largely forgotten how to stop and rest well. So here's a few examples of how Sabbath can support our mental and physical wellness. Firstly, anxiety. Anxiety is rife in our culture right now, but Sabbath helps us to release our sense of control and to choose to let go and trust God to be in control rather than trying to manage everything ourselves or fix everything, provide for ourselves. Burnout. Sabbath also provides a sustainable pace of life that's slower and more manageable. It's a preventative way of living rather than just about occasional rest after we crash and burn. It can help us manage digital overwhelm. So Sabbath can help us create sacred spaces that are tech-free in our lives that are really overwhelmed. It's an opportunity where we can unplug and reconnect with ourselves, with God, and with one another in a more authentic way. It also can help us look at low self-worth. So Sabbath can help us regain perspective and remember who we really are as people and what really matters in our lives. It's not just about being tied. Our worth isn't tied to who we are in terms of how much we earn, what we do, but it's about God's unchanging love for us when it's all said and done. Incredibly as well, research is starting to show that these kind of Sabbath benefits don't just extend to the day itself, but they can extend right through the whole working week. So the restoration carries on throughout our whole lives. So when you really think about it like that, the question shouldn't be, have I got time to Sabbath, but really, can I afford not to Sabbath? Okay, so maybe I've convinced you that this idea of Sabbath offers us plenty of benefits and is a good idea, in theory. But how do you actually put it into practice in our lives, week in and week out? How do we do that? For many of us, we think of the chance to stop as something that we earn after hard work, like a bit like a holiday after 6 months of real hard slog. But that's not what Sabbath is. It's not a reward for hard work. Sabbath is a gift of grace. It's freely given to us by God. And so it's not earned for a job well done. It's just a gift. For some people as well, I think the idea of Sabbath can feel a bit of a burden at first, rather than a gift. It can seem like one more thing to do or cram into our already busy lives. But actually in Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 to 14, the Bible calls Sabbath a delight and not a chore. It says this: if you call the Sabbath a delight, then you will find your joy in the Lord. So maybe try beginning with that as your starting point if you're thinking about this idea of Sabbath. That it's a gift and a joy. And with this in mind, here's a few things to consider if you're trying to unpack this idea of Sabbath and maybe it's a bit new to you. A typical day of Sabbath could include any of the following things. It could include worship, so time to connect with God, whether that's alone or in a corporate setting, like a church. It could include rest, so creating physical and mental spaces of pause in your life. It could include delight, so enjoying God's good gifts to us, whether that's nature, music, art, food, celebration meals with family, time with quality friends. It could include gratitude, so things like remembering God's good gifts to us and being thankful for what we have. And it could include contemplation, so reflecting on what truly matters beyond productivity and work. Now, although dedicating a specific day to Sabbath is biblical, the concept of Sabbath thinking can actually begin to permeate our whole lives and begin to transform our whole outlook and our whole weeks. Here's a few more examples of some tips you could think about exploring. If Sabbath is a new idea to you, you could start small. Just begin with manageable Sabbath moments, taking regular pauses in your week, maybe starting with a half day or even just an hour. You don't have to start with a full 24-hour window. Another tip I would give you is just plan ahead. So put it in the diary and make sure that rest is protected time in your life, and that it's regular. It's a regular rhythm, that it's diaried, and you know when it is, because it's easier to stick to a set day or a set time. Try to create some boundaries, so prepare to minimize disruption, especially from technology. Switch your phone off, unplug your devices, it helps. And also remember to focus on the purpose over the rules. So it's less about legalism, as we said, and it's more about trying to remember the key principles. So trusting in God's provision, practicing gratitude, delighting in his presence, all of those things we just talked about before. Finally, try to develop Sabbath thinking as a whole thinking throughout your week. Try to cultivate rhythms of rest that, go beyond just the Sabbath day, but actually are part of your whole life. Personally, I've also learned that Sabbath can look different in different seasons and different stages of life. For example, when I was a new mum, Sabbath really looked nothing more than snatched moments when a baby was sleeping. But now that my son's a bit older, it looks like a full day off as a family often. Sometimes it might also be a morning, like going for a walk or just putting some intentional pauses in my working week too. So maybe a good place to start is thinking about what works in your context and your life stage. And basically, I'd really encourage you to just have a little bit of fun with it, to really try some different things out and see what feels restful and life-giving and helps you to flourish in your life and your context. The key for me really is about being intentional and also focusing on the heart, not rule keeping. I think in conclusion, I just wanted to revisit that incredible truth that we began with, though, that Sabbath holds at its core. It's the truth that we are loved, not for what we produce or achieve or succeed at or what we do at all, but who we are simply as children of God. Knowing this truth that we're loved by God gives us the freedom to rest in him, to trust him with the things that are left undone, and to prioritize his presence over endless productivity and work. And isn't that just an incredible gift that we all get to live in and unwrap? I want to end this talk by just challenging you to discover, or maybe rediscover if you tried it before and then kind of given up, that gift of Sabbath for yourself this week. If this idea is totally new to you, then perhaps just think about one way you could introduce the idea of Sabbath rest into your week this week. You could even come back next week and tell us how you got on with it and tell us, what you did. In a minute, I'm going to open up to Conversation Street, and we're going to have a chat as a team about how different ones of us practice Sabbath rest in our busy lives and how it looks for different ones of us. So do stick around for that and post your questions, because we're really happy to answer any you've got. But I just wanted to finish just by plugging a couple of books as resources as well, if you're interested in delving into this idea a little bit more. So 2 books I really love about the whole idea of Sabbath and rest. The first one is called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. So it looks something like that. You can get it on Amazon or any good bookstores. And it's by John Mark Comer. And it's just a really good deep dive into some of what we've been talking about now. Like, if you want to learn more about the theory and more about the practice of Sabbath living, it's a really great, meaty read. And the other one I wanted to recommend, it's a bit of shameless plugging here, but this is a book that I wrote myself called Sand Between Your Toes. And it's a devotional, so it's a collection of daily Bible reflections, basically, 100 of them in total, that kind of all centered on this theme of rest and resting and leaning into God. And it's just very light, 5-minute read a day. So if you just wanted to start with something really small and manageable, you could just take that and just use it as a sort of reflection point. You don't have to do it every day. Even if you did it once a week, it would be good. So yeah, two examples of some resources you could use. But obviously there's loads of great books out there on this subject. And I think we're going to unpack it a bit more now as a team, aren't we, as well? I'll pass back to Matt at this point.
Very good. Very good. So first question, why is it called Sand Between Your Toes?
Love that title.
Because it's a bit of marketing, isn't it? It's a beach-themed devotional, so sand between your toes.
Okay. Very good. And why did you write the book?
I wrote it because I was a busy mum working in marketing, a new mum at the time, and I was wrestling a lot with this very subject in my own life. I wanted to understand how I could continue to live in God's rest in a season of life that was very, very busy, both at work and at home. And I wasn't doing it very well. So I kind of started writing the book by just wrestling with scriptures and spending time asking a lot of these questions myself. Yeah. So it's some of my reflections out of that season of life, actually.
So were you, I find this fascinating because were you, let me just preface all of this. You were a pastor's kid, right? So you grew up in church talking about Sabbath,
yeah,
and rest. So you had this conscious knowledge that maybe Sabbath was a good thing, but that you weren't experiencing it when you were having the kids. So were you quite active with your practice of Sabbath before Ben turned up, or was it just a case of actually my life is just in desperate need of rest right now?
Yeah, no, I think it was the latter. I don't think I've ever been very naturally good at this, which is why it's quite funny that I've written a book on it, of all things. I didn't write this book as an expert. I wrote it as a learner, in all honesty. I wrote it because it was a book I needed. So it's my kind of learning and practice. No, I grew up in a Christian household, so we always went to church on a Sunday, but my dad was a pastor, so it wasn't his day off. It wasn't really, our family day off was probably a Saturday if we had any. So no, it wasn't modelled very well in my childhood, really. Sunday was a church day, but it wasn't a not busy day because Dad was working. So yeah, I didn't really think about it much when I was younger, I guess. It's only that I went through a season of real busyness. It's like, I literally can't take any more on. I can't work and be a full-time employee and a full-time mum and wife and all of the things, and have church commitments and some kind of semblance of friendships and social life and all the other things that we all try and juggle without learning how to do this better. And I think I was kind of, it was interesting that it intersected, like that book came out the year that we went into lockdown and the COVID pandemic, which was interesting timing because suddenly we were thrown into this period of life where life actually slowed right down for a lot of us. So it was a season of life. And it was definitely like, I need to learn how to do this rather than I've always been good at it.
No, that's great. And what was, going back to when you wrote the book and you started to put these devotionals together, what was the moment that it all clicked? What was that? Or was there a moment where it all was just like, now I get it, now I understand?
I don't know if there was one moment. I think it was little by little. It was like learning new behaviours, like we talked about rhythms of rest, didn't we? Rhythms of Sabbath. And I think it was about just like a lot of change in our lives. It was putting good practices in little by little. So like Sunday will be a day which is more of a family day, and we will look at, not turning on the laptops or looking at work today, or, think more consciously about it. Yeah, so I think it was little by little. It was, I don't know if that really answers it, but I don't think there was a moment or a big revelation. I think it was much more bit by bit. Yeah.
Which is quite often changes. How God does it, right?
Making small changes, like a lot of areas in life.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so much in what you've unpacked there in Sabbath, much more than I've really thought about it. To be honest, I think I'd probably use that shorthand of a day off and not think about the intentionality of it in quite the same way, and what you do with that time rather than just resting. There's actually, there's crashing out rest, isn't there? And there's gratitude and joy and all those things, and community and investing, actually, which sometimes takes more effort. And I like your challenge of actually thinking about it a bit, having some fun with it, and thinking, what would this look like, and trying to put in those rhythms.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is rest doesn't look the same in every season of life, and it also doesn't look the same for each of us. So I can't tell you what I do and you just transpose it on your life, because what's restful to me might be like your worst nightmare. Like my husband loves to go for a long run. That's how he has time out. He prays. He winds down, he thinks, he gets headspace. I hate running. That's my worst nightmare. So we're all different, aren't we? Like, I might sit there with a good book or something else. For me, I'm quite relational, so rest is quite often spending time with people. But for an introvert, again, that's the opposite of rest. That's hard work to them. So I think it's about knowing yourself and, like you say, playing with it, seeing what works for you.
Yeah, that's great. I think you had a slightly different background, didn't you, Matt? Did you have any kind of concept of Sabbath as you were growing up as a family? Was Sunday just like any other day, or was there a day in the week that was a bit different?
That's a really good question. When I grew up, it was the 90s. I mean, when we grew up, it was in the 80s, right? So I'm not just me. Everybody on this stage. We grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and I think back then, it felt like life was slower. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't have used the word Sabbath. I wouldn't have used the word day of rest. I didn't grow up in a Christian house. So it was not language that we necessarily would have used. But it did feel slower. The cars were slower. The pace of life was slower. Kids knew what it was to be bored. I was bored a lot. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And so when I was...
Gift of boredom.
You travelled in a car. What did you do? You look out the window. That's what you did, right? You didn't have iPads tattooed to the back of the car seats and stuff. And so... I think you talked about the digital side, didn't you? With all the tech that we have now, the big difference for me is all the things in life that are supposed to make life easier have made us more busy. And I think that expectation of productivity you talked about is much more powerful. Now, obviously, when I was a kid, I think you view the past differently anyway. If I asked my mum and dad, maybe it was crazy back then. But I don't know, it just felt slower. So I had a different upbringing. We didn't necessarily have a day off, but we didn't work the weekends. Do you know what I mean?
And it was things like shops had a closing time on a Sunday, didn't they? Like lots of shops.
I remember when the shops started
entirely. Yeah.
So you had to stop, and there was no online shopping then, was there? So
there was the whole discussion about Sunday trading, which went through Parliament, and it was a big deal, and there was a massive. I remember, my parents talking about it because they were kind of very pro not having shops open on a Sunday because it was the Sabbath and because it was a special day. I don't think I really understood why, but you kind of look back and go, there was something. I remember there's something about having a day that was different in the week that somehow definitely affected our family life. I mean, my parents did sort of play with it and try different things, and we weren't allowed to go to birthday parties on Sunday. That's the kind of... Because it was a family day, and that was quite a challenge. That was and try to explain to your mates at school that you couldn't come to their birthday party because it was a Sunday, and it was like, what? But I being a parent now, I get what my parents were trying to do. Of like, no, there's a day that's different. And I, to be honest, I look back and think about the family walks that we went on after a roast dinner. The kind of classic British Sunday, and actually I really value those times. I really value those connections with my parents and my siblings. I don't think I really appreciated at the time. But there's something about, and you talked about this again, about the intentionality, there's something about putting something in that makes it happen. Because, and I think what we saw with the shops being open and the digital side, and Sunday it's just been eroded, that sense of Sunday being any different from any other day. And even that work expectation of like, no, you will be on your emails on Sunday because Monday's a big day. And that whole, that has been eroded. And it feels like it's something to fight quite hard for. But you have to put in some sort of rhythm to help that fight. Otherwise, it just continues to get eroded. And so making a mark, whether it's not going to parties or whatever it is, but as I say, I get what my parents were trying to do. They were trying to put things in which made it different.
And for me, like, you're absolutely right. And I think, like, it's not about, Sabbath isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing something different. Yeah. It's about, like, for me, it's not about stopping doing everything. It's just about doing something that's different to the rest of the working week, that looks different to the rest of life. So, I don't know, because it can sound a bit boring, can't it? Like, I'm not someone that likes sitting still for a long period. So, again, rest.
I don't know.
Like,
It sounds lush to sitting
you
still
mean?
for. Not gonna lie.
and it can't always be sitting on a beach, can it? Because
Well,
how
not
many
in
times a
England.
year can you do that?
Okay, one day of the year.
Yeah,
We missed
like-
it. It was the amber warning. Just back then.
It was last week. No, but yeah, for me, it's like it's less about. It's not just about physically stopping. It's about that mental stopping, a mental shift, and that's something I've really realised. It's like kind of. Yeah, it's about refocus.
Yeah.
It's not about emptying my brain and just mindlessly like watching Netflix all afternoon, because that's actually like pseudo rest. It like ends up.
I don't think
leaving
it
you
does
quite
anything for your
depleted.
soul, does it?
No, it doesn't feed your soul. Whereas like moving from like work to focusing on something else, like family, friends, celebration, delight, those things that bring life to you.
Yeah.
Exercise, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those things. That's restful for the soul, I think. Yeah.
When you read the Gospels, you look at Jesus' life. So many of the healings he did, ironically, were on a Sabbath. And wherever he went and he would heal people, the religious leaders would moan at him for healing people on a Sabbath, which I just still think is the most ironic thing, right? The gall, I just don't know. But it's like you say, it's not. Sabbath is not doing nothing. And Jesus' response to this was to say, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And it's that kind of, it's this belief and understanding that actually it's a good thing that God's put this in place for us. So let me ask you a question. Let me pull the questions up here. What are practical ways, Calamas, we can prioritize taking a Sabbath over working to pay bills and look after children?
I think this is part of that erosion, that when we're in a place where there's an expectation, say that Sunday is like, or a Sabbath, every day is the same. And many cultures have this, that every day is a complete full-on working day. Imagining anything different becomes quite difficult. And it's quite a brave step to say, I'm not going to do that on one day. I'm going to take seriously this Sabbath. But I think with so many things in God, he says, when you take that step of faith, embrace risk. I think it was talked about this morning. God can do the unimaginable. And so I think for something like, certainly in terms of earning, it's like I can't afford not to have 7 days of earning in a week. I'd just say you just need to try God out on that. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen until you take that step of faith and say, I'm going to set aside some time. It may not be a whole day to begin with. I'm going to set aside some time that's different and see what God will do. But when we stay in that place of like, I can't possibly do this, I don't think we'll ever properly see the reality. Yeah. And I think with kids, I mean, trying to apply my upbringing then to having children in a completely different age, in a very digital age and everything else. It's something we've struggled with, and we've had some good ideas and some bad ideas, I think. But what I find in that, and it's kind of linked to that same question, is that when you create the space, when you make the decision to like, this is going to be different, things happen that you could not possibly imagine. And it's interesting with kids because they go, okay, well, we've not got any plans today for this or that and that, what we normally do. So what are we going to do? And you go, it's the boredom in the car bit a little bit, Matt. It's like, just allow ourselves just to be still for a bit, or just to hang out, just be around. And it's in that kind of hanging out that things emerge and things happen and conversations start that you wouldn't have any other time. But there's got to be, again, that step of creating something, which I love what you say, is like maybe God thought, no, we need this. I'm going to instigate this so that we can discover what that looks like.
It's like, it strikes me as you're talking, like the whole idea of creating that margin of rest in our lives, like being what we need, like as human beings. And for me, it's sort of like, it's almost like a confession of like, it goes back to that idea of God I trust that
Yeah.
you'll provide for me and step into the gap, that I do this much and work hard 6 days a week, and I trust you with that last bit. It's almost similar to the principle of tithing in a way with our
Yeah, it is.
money. It's
Yeah.
like tithing some of your time back to God. Like
Yeah.
this time's separate and it's for you and it's for other things. It's for
Yeah.
spiritual things. And, you know, that believing God will do more with
Yeah.
less because he's a miraculous God.
Well, I love
There's an element of trust, isn't it?
There is, and I love the story of Mark Mitchell in all of this. So Mark Mitchell is a friend of mine. He owns a car dealership, Lexus Chester, Mazda Chester, Chester Skoda. There's like 3 of them. But he doesn't open on a Sunday. It's what he's actually known for. He actually closes, if you think about a car dealership selling 3 brands of cars, and he closes it on what is probably the biggest sales day of the week, which is on a Sunday. And he just puts a notice up saying, yeah, we're not here on a Sunday, we're at home with our family. And he's very big on there has to be at least 1 day a week for everybody here. They might not be Christian to go spend time with their family. And he lost a dealership. He used to be a dealer for Mitsubishi, and he lost that because he refused to do Sunday trading, which is interesting. And then he gets Lexus, and I can't remember the order, but he gets Lexus, Mazda, and Skoda. He's got one of the most profitable dealerships in the country, right? And they are, well, I don't know if they're still killing it, but they are definitely killing it, right? So you could argue that if they opened on a Sunday, they'd sell more. I would argue if they opened on a Sunday, they would sell less. But even if they did sell more, I think Mark is like, well, I can trust God with, like you say, with those 6 days, right? And I think it's quite remarkable what he does. And there's something about this world in which we live about being remarkable, about making those kind of decisions. So I think, yeah, take the chance.
It's being recognised, isn't it? There's a lot of talk about the 4-day working week at the moment, and it's kind of
Yeah,
linked with the
that's
mental
true.
well-being. But that, for me, is like the world grappling back to Sabbath.
Yeah,
It's
like
like
we've lost
recognising
something.
that people are more productive when they've had some space and rest and ability to kind of explore other things in their lives and just, yeah, all the stuff you've been talking about. That, for me, is a clear sign that, no, we are, you know, the Bible says we are made in God's image and God created eternity in the hearts of man, that there's an imprint of God in us. And so when we stop listening to his word and his patterns and his rhythms, then there's something that we're kind of missing in ourselves. And it's interesting how, you know, completely from a non-Sabbath, non-church angle, that whole thought about maybe people are working too many hours. And, you know, there's lots of research there that 4-day weeks have become more productive and companies have started, you know,
Not convinced,
they're doing better.
but
You're still
okay.
not.
Matt says that as an employer. I'd love a 4-day week.
But it's a case of God worked 6 days, rested 1, right? And it's not I think this idea of taking Sabbath is not an idea of working less. I think there are some people out there that probably should just work. Do you know what I mean? They take like 6 day Sabbath, 1 day work, and I think that balance is just as wrong as overwork. Do you know what I mean? And I think the Bible talks a lot about working hard. We're going to come to this much later on in the wholeness series. But I do get the principle and I get the theory of it, you know, and I've even thought about it. Do we turn our office into a 4-day work week? And I'm like, it's a really interesting idea, but for me, what would I do with those other 2 days? Do you see what I mean? Anyway, when was the last time you felt properly rested, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally? What made that time different?
Okay, I can do that because I had some of that this week. So my wife and I got to Thursday evening. Was it Thursday evening or Friday? The Thursday evening. It was the beautiful amber warning heat wave. It was sunny. Tiring days at work, and it was like, should we go out? Should we just stay in? Should we do something a bit different? And my wife's big into sea swimming, and goes over to Liso Bay, which is just over the water on the Wirral here in Liverpool. Very flat beaches here, so it's quite hard to find any swimming in the sea. But this one is like slightly shelved, so right at high tide you can swim. Any other time you have to walk like a mile across the sand to get to the sea. So we thought, no, let's do it. Let's make the effort. And so we went out. You know, there was the most amazing evening, 26-degree heat. Had a lovely swim in the sea. We swam in the sea for an hour. No wetsuits or anything. Just had a really nice swim. walked back across the sand, got some fish and chips, watched the sun go down from the seawall. So that felt like emotional, it was connection with partner, it was activity, it was physical, but that felt real rest. And I think a big part of it was that doing something a little bit different and just allowing our senses actually to respond in a slightly different way. And although all the same stuff was going on, the same thoughts, the same conversations we needed to have, we could come at it from a slightly different angle. So yeah, that was mine.
I would say earlier today, actually, because generally our family tend to Sabbath on a Sunday. Yeah. So we came to church this morning, which was good, just quite good to spend time with friends and engage with God. And it was challenging in a good way. And then we had a friend over for lunch, so that was just nice quality time, good conversation. And then we were kind of we've got a few, I knew I had to come here at 6-ish to sort of set up for crowd church, but it's I've got 3 or 4 hours and nothing really to do. We have nothing planned in. And it's what should we do? And, said to Ben, no more screen time. He'd already spent a little bit of time on YouTube. And so it's what should we do? Let's get a few board games out. Let's play some games around the table in the kitchen. And so we just did that for a couple of hours. And it was just really relaxed, really fun, just some good quality family time. Yeah. And nothing complicated, It was just had some food, some drink.
What's your board game of choice?
Well, today we played Connect 4 and Avocado Smash. And also one called Ticket to Ride, I think.
Yeah, that's a good game. Yeah, I like that game.
Those are what we played today. But yeah.
So talking about rest being different for different people. So I like the idea of board games. We used to play quite a lot of board games. I know you're big into board games. Yeah. In fact, a lot of our board gaming has probably come from your kids through our kids. But thinking particularly in lockdown, actually, as well, sometimes when I've even put some photos on Facebook of trying to do a family board game is just the most stressful thing. Just the combination of our kids' characters and whatever. Maybe we just picked our timing really badly, but that's not my kind of reach for a relaxing time.
No, it's interesting because in August we're going to do a little mini break from this series. We're going to do something about holiday. So in the UK especially, August is the time we all take holiday. And there's this growing amount of research about how the way our holidays work is not really working for us. That we work crazy for the year, spend more money than we've got to spend on a big holiday, but the whole organization of that holiday is stressful. We get on the holiday, it's still stressful. If you go on holiday with somebody, with your partner, and your relationship's a little bit rocky, do you know the search term for divorce is peak late August when people get back off holiday? Wow. It's extraordinary, right? So these practices that we've put in place, these sort of substitutes, aren't working. So
it's not surprising, is it, when you think how much people fork out for the average family holiday now?
Oh, it's crazy.
It costs a fortune, especially if you have to go in school term time, out of term time. Yeah. And so just the sheer stress of the outlay of the cost puts a huge pressure on having to enjoy yourself.
It is, yeah.
And I don't want to preempt the holiday series here, but I think you said about Sabbath looking different for different people, and I think this is one of the ways where the kind of counterculture of setting a day, actually holiday possibly is also counterculture. It's tempting to get sucked into this is how people do holidays. This is the expectation. If we do this, it'll all be wonderful. Rather than actually sitting back and thinking, what would suit us? What would be a good way for us to do holiday? Maybe it's not that big stress. Maybe it's not the big expense. Maybe it's something very much more low key. Maybe it's something more active. I don't know. But being bold enough to say, I can live my life differently from the rest of the world is an important step.
It is, and figuring out what works for you. Sharon's put here in the comments, I like the idea that Sabbath is partly a time to take joy in the things in our lives and to be thankful for what God has given us. I think that whole thing about gratitude, just slowing down and just being grateful is super powerful.
Because when you're always moving and always on to next thing, on to next thing.
You forget.
There's no reflection time, is there?
Yeah. No,
There's no margin for
You
thankfulness.
have to create time for it.
Yeah.
No. Ellis says, the only other shop I know that closes on a Sunday is a kid's toy shop in town, The Entertainer.
Yeah.
Always thought it was weird, but now I'm starting to understand it more after you mention it.
It's
But
owned by a Christian.
Yeah, same thing. And actually, I think him and Mark are quite good friends.
Right.
Well, maybe not good. I think they know each other, and so I think there's a commonality there around that. So that'll be why. And I think if I owned a retail shop, I'd just close it on a Sunday. My warehouse is closed on a Sunday. I think that Sabbath points us to Jesus because he gives us a deeper inner rest and freedom. I think it's such a powerful thing. So a couple of questions to think about. And in closing, if you've got anything to throw in here, guys. How do you know when you're running on empty? What are your warning signs? And for those of you who maybe are a little bit like me, how many of you feel guilty when you're not actually being productive? Because I think there's different types of people, isn't there? There's people that just like permanently on Sabbath that need to sort their lives out. And then there's people who are just permanently switched on, and actually to switch off and not be productive. And not stereotyping, but I think men especially can feel guilty if they need to provide more for their family. Talking, what Callum said earlier, that guilt of not being productive. I think for me, when I understood Sabbath, it freed me from that, if that makes sense. Because if you just took time off for the sake of it, then I'm like, I should be doing something. I could make money. I could do this, right?
I feel like that was a big one for me. And, it goes back to where we began, which is, this idea that rest and Sabbath didn't come easily for me because I'm quite a driven type of person by nature.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you take any of the personality test type things or the Enneagram, I'm like a type 3, which is an achiever, like a real doer. So it's not my natural lean to do nothing, but then that's not necessarily what rest is. So that was a helpful understanding point to come to, that it's not about doing nothing per se, it's about doing something different and not just constantly being driven by the need to achieve and tick something off a list and do. What was the other question?
It's about how can you tell when you're feeling really burnt
Oh yeah,
out? What are the signs?
Definitely know this one, and my husband will attest to this too. When I am like a bit worn around the edges, I quite quickly get quite fratchy and lose my temper, and just have a much lower patience threshold with people around me, particularly my family, which I don't think is probably that unusual. But I also, thinking about it, it's like, that's the indicator that I really need a rest. But actually, the whole point of Sabbath is a regular rhythm, so you never get to that absolutely worn down point. It's supposed to be preventative, not waiting till you crash.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to rest through the week rather than wait till I get to that point of being a nightmare to live with.
Yeah.
And Andy's grateful when you do that.
Yeah.
I think that diminished capacity, I don't know whether that actually is the definition of burnout or not, but it's probably part of it. But that sense in yourself that you've not got, the lower patience, and I think that's similar for me. But being a natural introvert, it's around people. That if someone then engages me with any kind of topic that needs any kind of thought or decision, or even just engagement sometimes on a kind of emotional level, and I just can't do that. It's like, okay, yeah, you really need to just stop and maybe get some space. But I had the immense privilege of having a sabbatical from work. They don't call it sabbatical, they call it career break, and they don't pay you. But I had 2 months, and I then could go back to my job back in autumn, off a really, really busy time. And that I found really hard to do nothing. The first week I had right, this is my plan for my 2 months. 2 months, wow, that's so much time. And I had this plan, and by the end of the kind of first week, I was just really struggling to kind of implement this plan and then feeling bad about it. And it took me a month of literally just getting up in the morning and having nothing to do. It took me a month to get to the point of And it was really at that time that then I could properly start engaging with people, with friends, with family, and just like, I just had time for people, had time to think about where they were at and kind of walk with them, which is kind of what I wanted out of the time. But I was astonished it took so long. And that was, and again, you say you need to put it in, and my wife's saying that all the time, you need to put it in regularly so you don't get to that point. But that was a really strong sign for me. By the end of that 2 months, I was, and people noticed this, like, you're really different. It's like, I'm kind of engaging with you at a much deeper level, much quicker, just because I have that kind of emotional, mental capacity.
Hang on, we've got some more comments here. They're all coming in thick and fast.
I love it. We just keep going, shall we?
Leo Davo. I assume that's Lee. We've been intentionally practicing Sabbath for the last year. Not always easy, but has been transformational. Trying to Sabbath with others. And he's put here, opportunities to giggle with others. And that's helped me to start a recovery from burnout.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
good
have
stuff.
some fun.
Yeah.
Simple.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Sabbath is not meant to be done in isolation.
No.
And there's a lot of things in life that we think, I need more me time. If there's a few phrases I could eradicate from the dictionary, me time would be one of them. It's not about me time. It's about focusing on the goodness of God and reconnecting with God. And that is done often in community with others. Now, I appreciate if you're an introvert, that sounds like a nightmare. I'm not saying Sabbath has to be done with other people, but it can be, and probably for most of us should be, at least some of the time. Really good, Anna. Getting off the treadmill is so easy to find yourself on. And as you say, the Sabbath is a gift to recognize. And what is this life if full of care? And I think it's such an important point. And I'm just going to, in closing, let me just take the opportunity just to say that, like I said, in August, we're doing a little look in our non-live live stream. So we practice what we preach and preach what we practice, to quote Simon from this morning. In August, we don't do live streams. We don't do the host thing. All the talks we put out are pre-recorded talks. We call them the non-live live stream. And Crowd takes the month of August off just to rest, just to be with family, and to focus. And we find that really powerful. And this August, the non-live live streams will be messages about holiday and looking at it from a biblical point of view, because like the way we do our time off, like the way we do our Sabbath, it's not working when it's, if we go with, it's me time and it's a 4-day work week, I think we're going to end up with the same problems. But when we do it from God's point of view, from God's directive, life becomes quite different. And this led us on a little rabbit trail around holidays and what does the Bible actually say about these things. And the Bible has these 7 festivals. And I just, we went to a festival for the first time this year, and I just loved it. But there's these 7 festivals in Scripture that all have very different purposes. And so we're going to dig into a few of those and say, right, well, how can we extrapolate that? What does that mean for the modern culture? What does that mean for the modern world? And let me tell you, having done the notes, having gone through the teaching, it is so life-giving. And you just sit there and you just read God's plan and intention, and you go, this is, Bono would read that and he'll go, I have found what I am looking for. Do you know what I mean? That's how good it is. So make sure you do stay connected with us. You have to be of a certain age to get that joke.
You have to have been born in the 80s.
Certain musical taste as well.
Yeah, showing my age and my musical taste. I was it's a total rabbit trail here, but I was walking down the street and I had it on the phone, listening to U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, and I thought about getting that on the back of a T-shirt. Do you know what I mean? I thought it'd be really... Anyway, another story. So yeah, do stay tuned for August. Next week, let me tell you what's coming up next week. We have the Right Reverend Dave Connolly, who's going to be with us talking about emotional resilience, which is a bit of a hot topic. I'm not going to lie. You'll love it or you hate it. It's going to be Marmite. So come find out which one. Do come join us next week. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Dave's got to say about this. It's going to be fantastic. You're hosting, I think, next week as well. So you'll be back.
Yeah, I am. So I'll be back here to quiz Dave.
Yes. So make sure you come join us and give Anna all the questions to quiz Dave with, because Dave loves it with the difficult questions. But yeah, in closing, guys, anything you want to say in closing?
I mean, I've probably said enough already, but just have a go. Just have some fun and let us know how you get on.
Yeah, similar really. Just that thought of Sabbath being a gift. This is something that your loving Heavenly Father understands that you need. And take some time to think about what it looks like and try a few things out. Some of them may be awful, some of them may be good, but stick at it because, it's a gift. It's a gift to you. And as we've said, I don't know what he said on crowd or whatever, but when God gives a gift, we need to then take hold of it.
Yeah,
if it just sits there unappropriated, to use a big word, but take hold of it. And Sabbath is one of those. Take hold of it, practice, play with it, and just allow something slightly different to emerge out of that time and process.
Very good. And I'd say that these ancient rhythms, sacred ancient rhythms, they're there for a reason. God knew what he was doing. And when you walk in obedience with that, it's amazing how much better life feels. And so we're talking about wholeness. And whole people know what it is to Sabbath and to rest and to do that well. And I think if you're not Sabbathing, I don't understand how you can attain wholeness. I just don't. If it's good enough for Jesus, I've got, little argument. Anyway, all of that said, thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic week wherever you are in the world. And thank you for coming. Thank you for your comments. Love the stories. Love the statements. Like I say, do come join us next week. If you want to hang around and come join us in the Google Meet afterwards. So Zoe, have we got that it's in the comments, the little link. go.crowd.church/meet, MEET. Come online, come and say how's it. We'd love to talk to you. We'll be on there for like 5 or 10 minutes. It's no big deal. It's just like hanging out after church. We just do it on Google Meets. It'll be great to see you in there. But if not, have a phenomenal week. God bless you. That's it from the beautiful Anna, from the equally beautiful Will, and from the equally beautiful me. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.